The crystal chandeliers bathed the ballroom in golden light. It was the society wedding of the season. Julian Crest, a billionaire tech mogul, was moments away from marrying Celeste Harrington. Elegance hung in the air like perfume. But outside, those towering glass doors, Evelyn Clarke stood motionless, her body shivering under a paper-thin dress not meant for a night like this. One hand braced her round belly, the other trembled as it gripped the silver handle. She had been standing there for minutes, maybe longer, gathering every last fragment of courage. Her reflection in the glass almost startled her. Her cheeks were sunken, lips cracked, skin too pale, but her eyes, those burned with something fierce. Her child shifted inside her, a tiny, urgent reminder of why she had come. The father of her baby was just inside, about to bind himself to someone else as if Evelyn had never existed. She was never supposed to survive. He left her with nothing, but here she was, unbroken. With a deep breath, she pushed open the doors. The heavy oak creaked as a wave of gasps swept across the room. Music screeched to a stop. The officiant paused, startled mid-vow. Dozens of eyes turned to the entrance. Confusion painted across every face. And at the front of the aisle, Julian stood frozen. His lips had just been about to meet Celeste's. His hands were gently resting on her hips, eyes soft, until now. Until her. Evelyn. The blood drained from Julian's face. His mouth tensed, his posture stiffened like he'd seen a ghost. The audience murmured in confusion. Who is that? Is she pregnant? A woman whispered near the back. Celeste turned to Julian, concern growing in her gaze. Julian? But he said nothing. Couldn't. He was still staring at Evelyn like the past had walked in wearing his guilt. Evelyn moved forward slowly, her steps unsteady but full of purpose. The silence thickened. With no hesitation, she raised her hand and struck him across the face. The sound cracked through the hall like thunder. A few people flinched. One woman screamed softly. Celeste gasped, stepping back, horrified. Julian's head snapped to the side, the imprint of her fingers already blooming red across his cheek. Gasps erupted. A wave of chaos rippled through the crowd. And then Evelyn's voice cut through the noise, low, sharp, and steady. "Miss me, darling?" Evelyn Clarke was never the type who believed in happily ever afters. Her life didn't have room for fantasy. At 26, she was used to surviving. Her small apartment above a dusty bookstore rattled every time the subway passed underneath. Winters were brutal. The heating barely worked and the pipes screamed like ghosts in the night. Still, she made it work. Raised by a single mom who juggled cleaning jobs and night shifts just to keep food on the table, Evelyn learned resilience early. They didn't have much, but there was always love, and that mattered more than any chandelier. So when Julian first entered her life, she hadn't expected anything. He walked into the corner cafe where she worked part-time. Just another customer, she thought. But he kept returning, same table, same order. Black coffee, no cream, no sugar. At first, she thought nothing of it, but his eyes followed her movements, watching, but never imposing. One evening, as she wiped down tables, he said, "You always take the longest shifts, huh?" She glanced at him unimpressed. "That's called earning rent. You should try it sometime." He laughed, amused by her bluntness. "Maybe I will." He didn't flirt the way rich men usually did. No flashy lines, no grand gestures, just small talk and quiet presence. Eventually, she began to notice the subtle things, how he always left exactly $1 over tip, how he knew when she was too tired to smile, how he noticed the tiny doodles she made on receipts when she thought no one was looking. "You sketch?" he asked one night. "What makes you say that?" She replied, caught off guard. He tapped the table. "You've got ink on your fingers, and I've seen your napkin art." She smiled for the first time, unsure how to respond. "Doesn't mean I'm any good. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try," he said, voice softer than she expected. Evelyn didn't let people in easily. But Julian didn't push. He showed up, talked to her like she mattered. And slowly, without even noticing, she let herself believe maybe this was something. Before we continue the story, if you're new here, please consider subscribing to our Journal. It really helps us keep making stories like this. The late-night coffee runs turned into long walks. The conversations got deeper. He never bragged, never mentioned his last name. She didn't even know he was wealthy, not then. He was just Julian, the man who made her feel seen, and when he kissed her for the first time. After closing one rainy evening, when she was locking up, the world tilted. Not because it was magical, but because it felt real, familiar, safe. One night under a sky blanketed with stars, he whispered, "Marry me." She laughed, unsure if he was joking. "You're serious?" "As a heart attack," he said, brushing hair from her face, and she said yes. The wedding was nothing like the stories she'd imagined as a little girl. There were no towering cakes or sweeping ball gowns, just a quiet room inside a small chapel, on the edge of town. The scent of melted wax hung in the air. The pews creaked beneath the weight of a few close friends, people Evelyn barely knew. But she didn't mind. Julian stood at the altar wearing a white button-down and black slacks. No tux, no pretense, just him. Looking at her like she was everything. She had chosen a dress off a clearance rack 2 weeks earlier. Ivory with delicate lace at the sleeves. Nothing extravagant. But when he took her hand, slipped a simple silver band onto her finger, and whispered, "For better or worse," she almost forgot about the chill in the room, about how fast everything had happened. She repeated the vow, her voice trembling, not from nerves but from hope. When the officiant finally pronounced them husband and wife, he kissed her slowly, deliberately, like he meant it. The few guests clapped politely, some smiling, others merely watching. Evelyn tried to hold on to the warmth of that moment. She wanted so badly to believe it was the start of forever. But some things didn't sit right. The way the officiant, an elderly man, seemed hesitant around Julian, overly respectful. The cluster of sharply dressed men sitting in the back, whispering amongst themselves, their eyes occasionally flicking toward Julian. She had assumed they were work colleagues, maybe business partners. But they didn't look like the kind of people who belonged in a chapel like this. As they stepped outside, Evelyn saw a black luxury car waiting at the curb, the kind that turned heads. A driver stood beside it, stone-faced and stiff. Julian opened the door for her like it was nothing. When she gave him a puzzled look, he grinned. "Wedding present," he said, waving his hand toward the vehicle. Evelyn laughed it off, though a tight feeling formed in her chest. Since when did he have a driver? The first real clue came weeks later. They were at a dusty old bookstore downtown. She had been leafing through a worn poetry collection when she noticed the cashier's expression as Julian handed her a bill. Not curiosity, not admiration, recognition, hesitation, but just for a second. Then it was gone. Julian didn't seem to notice. He placed an arm around Evelyn's back and asked, "Find anything you like?" She nodded but couldn't stop thinking about the look in the woman's eyes. As they walked back to the car, Evelyn's mind buzzed. Then there were the clothes. Julian never flaunted labels, but his shirts were always fitted too perfectly. His shoes too clean, too quiet in their expense. One afternoon, she caught a glimpse of a label inside his jacket. Hand-stitched, Italian. "Good find," he said, with a smile when she asked. She believed him. Then Evelyn had never experienced peace like this. They spent mornings tangled in bed, afternoons cooking or wandering side streets of the city, evenings curled up on the couch. Sometimes he'd bring takeout, teasing her about how she always picked the weirdest dishes. Other times he'd fall silent for hours, lost in thought. She never questioned it. She thought that was love. The quiet in-between moments. The way he absent-mindedly traced circles on her wrist while she read. The way he brushed her hair behind her ear when she was too tired to talk. She didn't need grand romantic gestures. She just wanted this. Consistency, presence, someone who stayed. What she didn't realize was that Julian had begun to shift. Slowly, subtly. His gaze no longer held warmth. His touch felt more like a routine than desire. And his silence. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was distance. The moment her world changed came quietly in the bathroom of their apartment. She sat on the edge of the tub, a plastic stick in her hand, two pink lines staring back at her. Pregnant. The air seemed to leave the room. Her heart pounded, hands trembling. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, searching for something familiar. But the woman in the glass looked like a stranger, shocked, overwhelmed, and somehow glowing. Tiny breathless laugh escaped her lips. She pressed a palm gently to her stomach. There was life inside her, their life. Suddenly everything else faded. Every doubt, every flicker of uncertainty. Julian had always said she was his peace. His reason. She imagined him holding their child, his hard edges softened by fatherhood. She didn't wait. She grabbed her coat and rushed out into the night, her breath visible in the cold air. Her fingers curled tightly around the test. The apartment lights were on. His coat was on the chair. The stereo played soft jazz. She stepped inside, heart racing. "Julian?" she called out. He emerged from the bedroom, looking startled. Shirt slightly unbuttoned, sleeves rolled up, glass of scotch in hand. He tilted, his head. "I have to tell you something," she blurted. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She pulled the test from her pocket and held it out, her voice cracking. "I'm pregnant." A pause, then finally a smile, too smooth, too slow. "That's great news." But something in his tone felt off, like the words had been rehearsed, like they didn't belong to the moment. Still, Evelyn leaned into his arms when he embraced her, pressed her face against his chest, whispering, "We're going to be a family." His chin rested lightly on her head. His hand moved to her lower back. "A family," he repeated. But in his mind, the word didn't feel right. It felt like a trap, a chain. She was never supposed to be forever, just a distraction, a sweet chapter in his otherwise calculated life. And now she was something he hadn't planned for. The days that followed blurred together in a quiet haze. Evelyn kept telling herself the distance between them was stress, that Julian's withdrawn silence and late nights were just part of adjusting to the idea of fatherhood. He was building something, she thought, working late, planning for their future. But deep down, something didn't feel right. He stopped noticing the little things. He no longer reached for her hand during walks. He barely looked up when she entered the room. The smiles that used to appear so effortlessly now seemed forced, like he had to remember to pretend. His phone buzzed constantly, and he always turned away to answer it. The soft, low conversations behind closed doors made her chest tighten. "You've been working a lot," she said one night as they sat on the couch, her legs curled beside her. Her hand gently rested over the growing swell of her belly. Julian didn't even glance up from his phone. "Big projects," he muttered. "I feel like we barely talk anymore." Her voice was small. He finally looked at her, but his expression didn't change. "You're overthinking it." Maybe she was. Maybe the hormones were making her sensitive. But it had been weeks since he'd pulled her close without reason, since he'd laughed with her about nothing, since he'd asked her how she was feeling. She watched him closely, searching his face for something familiar. I miss you," she whispered. He hesitated, then reached for her hand. But his phone buzzed again and the moment shattered. "I have to take this," he said, already standing. She watched him disappear into his office, the door closing softly behind him. Her eyes drifted down to her stomach. Something had shifted and she wasn't imagining it. Julian, on the other hand, sat in his office with the lights dimmed, swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. His jaw clenched. The life he had spent years crafting, built on power, manipulation, and perfect control, was suddenly tangled. Evelyn was never meant to be part of it for this long. At first, she had been interesting, refreshing even. But now, with a baby on the way, she had become a complication. He didn't want to be a father. He didn't want to forever. He had played the role, just long enough to keep her loyal. And now he had his eyes set on something far more advantageous. Celeste Harrington, daughter of one of the country's most powerful real estate magnates. Celeste was old money, prestige, everything Julian wanted access to. She could unlock doors Evelyn didn't even know existed. To Celeste, he was a wealthy, unattached entrepreneur, a man of influence. He'd made sure of that. Evelyn? She was the piece of his life he needed to erase. Quietly. Cleanly. That evening, he met Celeste for dinner at a high-end restaurant nestled in a rooftop garden. The table shimmered under candlelight. Celeste greeted him with a playful smile. "You're late, Julian," he leaned in, offering a grin. "Business," she chuckled, sipping her wine. "You always were mysterious." He studied her, the light bounced off the diamonds at her wrist, the way her laugh drew glances from other tables. She fit. She belonged in his world. Evelyn never did. Back at the apartment, Evelyn sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at her untouched plate of food. She checked her phone. No messages. She had called him twice already. Finally, she sent a text. "Still at the office?" Minutes later, a reply. "Long meetings. Don't wait up." She sighed, placing a hand on her belly. Lately, meetings had become the go-to excuse. But she didn't push. Julian had always worked late hours. Maybe this was no different. A few days later, as he left again for another mysterious meeting, she dared to ask, "Who keeps calling you so late?" He didn't even look up. "Investors." At midnight, he looked at her then, smile tight, eyes cold. "What do you want me to do? Quit everything and sit here with you?" "No, She stopped herself. "Never mind." He walked over, tilted her chin up. His fingers were soft, but his eyes were unreadable. "I'm doing this for us, for our future." She nodded, but his words felt hollow. Across town, Julian lifted a glass to Celeste. She laughed at his story, unaware that she was part of the same lie, the same mask he wore every day. For Evelyn, the silence grew louder, the empty side of the bed more painful. She cooked dinners he never ate. She stared out windows, waiting for headlights that never came. And yet she kept hoping, until one night he came home early. The sound of the door unlocking startled her. He never came home early. She turned, startled, a dish towel still in her hand. He was holding a bouquet of soft pink roses. "For you," he said, with a smile that looked like it belonged to the man she fell in love with. She blinked, confused. "What's this for?" "I've been distant," he said, stepping closer. "Work's been chaos, but I forgot what matters most." He touched her cheek. "You." Tears stung the edges of her eyes. "I thought maybe you weren't happy anymore." He shook his head. "I am, and I will be, especially once the baby's here." He rested a hand over her stomach, and for a moment she believed him. She let herself believe everything was going to be okay. That night he held her while she slept. He whispered things that made her laugh, brushed his fingertips over the curve of her belly, and she let herself drift into the safety of it all. But what she didn't know was that Julian Crest had already made his decision. He was planning her end. Evelyn had spent the whole day floating in a strange calm, her thoughts wrapped around Julian's sudden shift in affection. He had been warm, attentive, even sweet, like the man she used to know. For the first time in weeks, she felt hopeful. Maybe he had truly realized what mattered. Maybe the cold distance had just been stress, like he'd claimed. That evening, he suggested something unexpected. "A trip. You and me," he said over dinner. "Just us. One last getaway before everything changes." Evelyn's breath caught. "A vacation?" "You mean it?" He smiled, reaching for her hand across the table. "You deserve a break." "We both do." She blinked back the sting of tears. It had been so long since he looked at her with that kind of softness. "Where would we go?" "Somewhere quiet. Peaceful," he said. "I'll handle everything." And he did. A few days later, they arrived at a remote coastal resort perched high above the cliffs. Their private villa overlooked the ocean, a masterpiece of minimalist luxury. Stone bathtub carved into the floor, linen drapes swaying with the breeze, the faint scent of salt in the air. Evelyn stepped onto the balcony, her dress fluttering. Behind her, "It's beautiful," she whispered. Julian wrapped his arms around her from behind. Only the best for you. The first 2 days were bliss. They walked along the shore barefoot at sunset. He made her laugh again, real laughter, the kind she hadn't felt in months. One night they dined by candlelight under a sky littered with stars. He was gentle, affectionate, whispering dreams of their future with the baby. Evelyn let herself believe. Maybe she had been wrong to doubt him. Maybe the distance had only been temporary. She lay against his chest one night, tracing the curve of his arm. "This is what we needed," she murmured. "I love you." Julian stroked her hair. "I know," he whispered. She didn't notice that his eyes stayed open long after hers had closed. Their final night at the villa was almost dreamlike. The air was warm. The sea breeze carried the scent of wildflowers through the open windows. Julian poured her a glass of juice, handed it to her with a small smile. "To us," he said. She clinked her glass against his, her heart swelling. "To our future." The drink was sweet, too sweet, but she didn't question it. Maybe it was the exhaustion from the beach, or maybe it was just the comfort of being cared for again. She sipped slowly, unaware of how the fog started creeping into her limbs. Moments later, her vision blurred. Her head felt heavy. Her body slackened. "Julian." Her voice slurred as panic laced her words. "Something's wrong." He caught her before she collapsed, easing her onto the bed. His touch was calm, soothing, too calm. "Shh," he whispered, brushing hair from her face. "Just rest." Her limbs refused to move. The world around her spun into a gray blur. She tried to stay awake, to fight the darkness creeping in, but it was too strong. Her last thought before blacking out was a quiet scream inside her mind. He did something. When Evelyn awoke, everything was wrong. The warmth of the villa was gone. The scent of the ocean replaced by damp air and cold dust. She lay on a thin mattress in a room with no windows, no lights, no familiar sounds. She sat up slowly, every muscle aching. Her throat was parched. Her dress was wrinkled and dirt-stained. The baby, her hand shot to her belly. A flutter. Weak. But there. Relief filled her lungs, but it was fleeting. She stumbled to her feet and forced open the door, only to step outside into an endless stretch of wilderness. No villas, no people, just trees and shadows and the sharp smell of soil and salt. He left her. He brought her to paradise only to abandon her in hell. Her legs trembled as she took one step, then another. Cold wind sliced through her dress. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, trying to protect her baby from the chill, from the betrayal, from the grief. Time blurred. Days, maybe. She couldn't tell. She walked, stumbled, crawled. No water, no food, just the stubborn will to survive. And then, just when her body could no longer carry her, a distant hum broke the silence. Headlights. At first, she thought it was a hallucination, but the sound grew louder, the light brighter. A truck. She tried to raise her hand, but her arm barely moved. The vehicle slowed, tires crunching against dirt. The driver stepped out, tall, broad, shadowed by the headlights. He saw her and stopped cold. "Jesus," he muttered, rushing forward. Hey, I got you." She collapsed, just as you. He reached her, strong arms caught her. A warm jacket wrapped around her shoulders. "You're safe now," the man whispered. She blacked out in his arms. The scent of wood smoke greeted her before her eyes fully opened. Warmth blanketed her, both physical and emotional, something she hadn't felt in what felt like forever. Evelyn slowly stirred, her body aching from days of wandering through the wilderness, her mind still foggy. She was lying on a worn-out mattress covered in a thick quilt. The room was small, rustic, wooden beams, faded curtains, a fire crackling in the corner. It wasn't luxury, but it felt safe. She blinked, taking in the unfamiliar space until a rough, steady voice pulled her attention. "You're awake." Her eyes darted toward the source, Mike, the man who had rescued her. He stood near the small kitchen. a mug of something warm in his hand, watching her carefully. His presence was quiet but solid. He didn't ask questions. Right away, he just walked over and set the mug on the nightstand beside her. "Tea," he said simply. "Should help." She didn't speak. Her throat was too dry, her soul too heavy. Mike didn't press. He sat down in the old armchair by the fire, rubbing his jaw like he'd seen too many things he wished he hadn't. After a long moment, he spoke again. "I found you about 6 miles out. Collapsed near the old gravel road. Thought you were gone." Evelyn barely nodded, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. She felt empty. And yet, something deep inside her was still burning. A cold, quiet fury. Julian had looked her in the eyes, held her, kissed her, and then he left her to die in a forest like she meant nothing. Mike sighed. "Look, you don't have to tell me anything, but if someone did this to you, you need to tell someone. The cops at least." A bitter laugh almost escaped her. The cops. What would they do against Julian Crest? He had money, power, influence. He could erase her with a phone call, and he had tried. Mike didn't push further. He stood, walked over to a chair in the corner, and returned with a folded stack of clothes. "They're old but clean," he said, setting them down gently. "Take your time. You're safe here." That word, safe, felt foreign, like something from another language she no longer understood. As Mike stepped toward the door, a low murmur from the next room drifted in. A television broadcast, faint but steady. Evelyn didn't pay much attention, until a name reached her. "Here's Julian Crest set to marry Celeste Harrington in what insiders are calling the wedding of the year." Her blood turned to ice. She sat up too fast, the room tilting. Pain flared through her limbs. Mike turned, alarmed. "Hey, easy." But she was already swinging her legs over the side of the bed, gripping the wooden frame to steady herself. She stumbled toward the living room, her heartbeat pounding like war drums in her ears. The screen showed a reporter standing outside a luxury venue, floral arrangements and red carpets behind her. The Crest Harrington wedding is expected to host some of the biggest names in business and politics. And there he was, Julian, arm in arm with Celeste, smiling, perfectly composed, dressed in a designer suit with a diamond cufflink flashing at his wrist. Evelyn stared in disbelief. Her stomach churned. Her hand gripped the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. The man who tried to kill her, the father of her unborn child, was being paraded on TV like royalty. Mike's voice was cautious. "You okay?" "No," she whispered. Her voice shook, but her eyes were steel. "He thinks I'm gone." Her hand went to her belly. The baby, their baby. He had tried to erase them both, replace them, start fresh like she had never existed. But she wasn't just going to survive, she was going to make sure he never forgot. "I need to go back," she said, more to herself than anyone. Mike looked confused. "Back where?" "To the wedding." He raised an eyebrow, stepping forward cautiously. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but you're barely able to stand." "I have to stop this," she interrupted, her voice sharper now, anchored with clarity. "He doesn't get to walk away. Not like this." Mike studied her for a moment. She could tell he was weighing his options. She was just a stranger, but something in her eyes must have told him she wasn't bluffing. Finally, he let out a long breath, grabbed his truck keys from the counter and nodded. "Let's go." And with that, Evelyn Clarke was no longer the woman Julian left in the woods. She was the woman about to return and end his lies in front of the whole world. The grand hall gleamed under a canopy of crystal chandeliers. Rows of white roses lined the aisle like a trail of opulence. Every guest sat poised, phones discreetly recording as Julian Crest stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, fingers gently brushing Celeste Harrington's hand. The officiant's voice echoed with calm precision. "You may now." The heavy doors slammed open with a thunderous crack. Gasps swept through the crowd as all heads turned. There in the entrance stood Evelyn, her hair tangled, cheeks hollowed by exhaustion, dress tattered and clinging to her swollen belly. But her eyes, they burned with purpose. Each step she took was deliberate. Guests whispered frantically, Celeste stiffened. Julian's eyes widened in disbelief, his entire body freezing as if time had collapsed around him. It couldn't be. She wasn't supposed to be alive. She kept walking. Evelyn didn't flinch, didn't slow, and when she reached the altar, she lifted her hand and slapped Julian across the face with every ounce of strength she had. The crack of her palm striking his cheek echoed through the cavernous room. Celeste gasped, stepping back in horror. Julian stumbled slightly, stunned. Murmurs erupted, some guests rising to their feet, others pulling out their phones in disbelief. Evelyn's voice rang out sharp and cold. "Miss me, husband?" Julian stared at her, face pale, lips parted. "Evelyn." It was all he could say. She turned to the audience. "This man left me for dead," she said, her voice strong despite the tremble in her limbs. Pregnant. Alone, in the middle of nowhere. The room erupted into a new wave of shocked gasps and murmurs. Julian tried to speak. "She's lying," he said quickly. "She's unstable. I don't know what happened to her." But Evelyn was ready. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folder, tossing it onto the altar. Papers spilled across the floor, medical reports, injury documentation, a written statement from Mike, and finally, a DNA test, confirming Julian was the father of the child growing inside her. "Tell them where I've been for the past 2 months," she said. "Tell them why you drugged me, why you left me in the woods with nothing but a lie." Julian froze. His usual charm, his practiced smile, none of it worked now. The room had turned against him. Even the officiant took a step back. Celeste's face crumpled. "You told me you were never married." He reached for her. "Celeste." She jerked her hand away, ripping off the diamond ring he'd given her and throwing it to the floor. "We're done." The crash of the ring against the marble floor felt like a gavel striking judgment. From the front row, a voice rang out. "You are no son of mine." Julian's mother had risen to her feet, her face hard with disappointment. She turned and walked away, back rigid. Business associates in the room were already whispering, checking their phones, reevaluating every investment tied to his name. The venue manager approached, face tight with professionalism but eyes filled with disdain. "Mr. Crest, we're going to have to ask you to leave." Julian's breathing grew ragged. His world, his carefully curated empire, was crumbling in real time. He turned, glancing across the room but found no allies. Just contempt. And Evelyn, she, stood motionless. Not smiling, not gloating, just surviving. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. Julian's eyes swept the crowd one last time, then he turned and walked out, alone. The silence lingered long after he was gone, the courtroom was hushed. Every breath held as the judge's gavel fell with a sharp crack. "The settlement is awarded in full to Ms. Evelyn Clarke." The words echoed across the marble chamber like music. Julian sat across the aisle, jaw clenched, his once pristine appearance dimmed by weeks of public fallout and scandal. His suit no longer carried the same power it once did. His eyes were empty, dulled by the weight of losing everything. Evelyn didn't even glance at him. Her hand rested protectively over her belly as she exhaled softly, relief loosening her chest for the first time in months. She hadn't fought for wealth. She had fought for truth, for justice, for her child. And now she had both. The court had not only awarded her a substantial share of Julian's assets, but also validated everything he tried so hard to bury. The lies, the betrayal, the attempt to make her vanish. As she stepped out into the sunlight, Mike was already waiting near, the steps leaning casually against his truck. He straightened as she approached, his eyes steady, proud, and full of quiet respect. "You did it," he said. Evelyn looked up at him, her expression soft, tired, but strong. "No," she said gently. "We did." Months passed. The media storm. Julian disappeared from headlines, his empire splintered, his name now a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. He lived in exile somewhere in Europe, surrounded by money but no legacy, no power, no love. just silence. Evelyn, meanwhile, rebuilt everything from the ashes. She didn't use the money to chase luxury. Instead, she built something real. She opened a foundation for women like her, women discarded by powerful men, women who had been silenced and left behind. It was more than charity. It was a refuge, a chance, a community. And beside it, she launched an art studio, a publishing house, for aspiring female illustrators. The dreams she once doodled on napkins became vibrant canvases, posters, children's books. Mike was always there, quiet and steady, never expecting anything but always showing up. He helped paint walls, fix broken windows, and brew the worst coffee imaginable. He was more than a friend, he was family, the kind you choose. One evening, Evelyn sat on the balcony of her new home, wrapped in a knitted blanket, a cup of tea beside her. In her arms, a newborn stirred, warm, fragile, impossibly small. The baby's fingers curled around hers like a promise. She kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, "We made it." The wind blew gently through the trees, and for the first time in years, Evelyn felt light. She didn't think of Julian. She didn't need to, because she had already won, not just in court, but in life. She had chosen herself, her child, her future. And that future had never looked brighter. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and let us know your favorite moment in the comments.